Hi again and welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to be solving the trips and users problem on LeetCode using SQL. This is also a hard problem. I've shared the link to the problem statement in the description below, so do check it out. But let me give you a quick overview of what we're trying to do in this video. So we're given two schemas, users and trips, and we're asked to calculate the cancellation rate of unbanned users for each day between October 1st and October 3rd. Now, obviously, the data is scattered between the two tables. There's trip information in the trips table and the information about banned users in the users table. So we need to combine the tables, bring them together to calculate the cancellation rate of unbanned users. I do encourage you to take a further look at the details on LeetCode, but for now, let's get started. As I've already explained in my previous video on how to approach hard problems on LeetCode, we're going to take the modular approach to solving this problem. So first thing, looking at the users table, I know that unbanned users is something that's readily available. So first let's write down the query to fetch unbanned users. We start with the select statement from users and use the where condition banned is equal to no. So this would give us a list of the unbanned users. Okay, so what information do we need about the unbanned users? Let's pick their user ID and let's keep the role of the user as well for now. If we want to, we can remove it later on if it's not required. And I've used the distinct clause here, which is like totally optional because user's ID is actually a primary key and there wouldn't be any duplicates in an ideal world, but I guess it's just out of practice that I'm adding distinct just to make sure that we're actually getting non-duplicate items from this table. Now I need to calculate the cancellation rate of the unbanned users. So let's get started with that part. As per the definition given in the question, the cancellation rate is basically the number of cancelled requests divided by total number of requests for that day, and all of these requests have to be from unbanned users. I'm going to start by getting the count of cancelled trips. So how do we do that? First, I'm going to say select count, and when the trip status equals cancel. Now we know there's only three types of statuses, and the cancel trips start with the word cancel. So I'm going to use the string matching expression like and say when the status is like cancelled, count that trip ID. And this would essentially give us the number of cancelled trips. Next, let me count the total number of trips. So we have the count of the number of cancelled trips. Now we need to divide it by the total number of trips. And just out of practice, I'm going to add a distinct here just to make sure that I'm getting the distinct trip IDs. Again, it's not required because ID is the primary table, but in case, in the real world scenario, there are some situations where there are no primary IDs or primary keys, so you may have to use the distinct. So next up we have count of the distinct number of trips, which is essentially the total number of trips on a given day. Speaking of days, let's add the request date to this query so that it returns the cancellation rate each day. And of course, this query is written on the trips table because that's where all the information is at. And so we refer to the schema of the trips table to see what the name of the date field is. So I have the request date here. Just quickly remove the alias that I had added earlier for num underscore cancel because we don't really need it when we're doing the division. I'm also going to remove the num underscore trips. That was just for understanding. But once we have the calculation in place, we need to name the calculated field itself. So we're going to name the whole thing as cancellation rate. So next comes the from clause. We have it from the trips table. So essentially at this point we have a list of unbanned users, and we also have the formula for calculating the cancellation rate. Next we need to kind of bring these two together to find the cancellation rate for unbanned users. So essentially what I'm going to do with this query is say calculate the cancellation rate for users whose user ID is in this list of unbanned users. So I'm going to use the where clause to say where client ID in a list of unbanned users. Now bear in mind that a user could either be a client or a driver, so that's where it gets a little tricky. You could have the same user ID either under the client field or the driver field, so we need to account for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say where client ID is unbanned or the driver ID is unbanned. Let's now remove the role field from this query because at this point I realized I no longer need it, and then just run the query. Looks like we have an error here, and our answer is not matching the expected output, of course, because I have forgotten to add the request date in the group by, because we're interested in calculating the cancellation rate per day. So let me just add that in here and try running it again. Okay, so at this point I know that something's totally off. Let me begin by getting my column names to match with the output, even though that's not the important part. Let's just get our answer to look as closely as the expected output as possible. So I'm just going to rename the columns here. And I've also forgotten to include a rounding function, so let me just go ahead and add that to our division here. Also, a couple of things I realized after re-inspecting the code was that I had to change the logic from or to and. That is, we want the driver ID and the client ID both to not be a banned user. So let's just change that here. And the other thing I realized was the spelling of cancelled in my status like cancel statement was wrong. I was missing an L, and that's why the query wasn't picking anything up. Let's run this again and check if anything changes. And there we go. We got the expected output. Now let me try clicking submit. Well, the solution wasn't accepted because something's missing here, and that is we've not specified the date range for which we want this. So that's the only thing that's missing. Let me go ahead and add that. Remember, we want the date range between October 1st and October 3rd, so that's what I've added here, and this would come before the group by clause. Okay, great. So I think this works. I'm going to go ahead and submit it. 6:35 milliseconds. I think it could be better, so we should go ahead and clean up our code a little bit. I'm going to use common table expressions to eliminate redundancy because, as you can see in our where clause, we've written the query to fetch unbanned users twice, so that can definitely be better. So I'm going to put it out in a common table expression, which is written using the with statement as shown here. So I'm just going to go and paste that here, and then I'm going to say where client ID in select users ID from T1, which is our temporary result set holding the unbanned users. I'm going to do the same thing for driver ID. Just paste that down here and click submit. Okay, so we've reduced the runtime a little bit to 500 milliseconds, so it's relatively faster now. And I do believe that if you take out the distinct statement from these queries, it's going to run a little bit more faster. So I do encourage you to check that out for yourself. Also, I should mention that I've solved this problem in almost like real time, so do apologize for the confusion, if any, and for like moving back and forth between the code. I do hope you were able to gather some insight on how to approach problems like this. If you enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone who you think might find it useful. Feel free to drop in a comment if you have any questions. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see similar videos on solving SQL problems. I'll see you around, and until next time, bye.